Oh man. All right. Hello, everybody. Today I've got for you kind of a review, I guess, of the book Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky. Back from, looks like it was, based on what I've read, it was published first in 1972. Soviet science fiction. Um, the version I read was translated by Antonina Bouis, Bouis. Not sure exactly the pronunciation, but that's going to be true of all the names throughout this thing. So here we go. So you may have heard of this book. If you're a science fiction fan, you've probably heard of this book. If you're not a big science fiction reader, you've probably, but if you are into like video games, you've probably heard of the game series. Now it's a series because the second one just came out, I think, called Stalker. And these games are kind of about exploring this area where the laws of physics kind of don't work in certain places, and it's very dangerous, and but at the same time, there's interesting stuff there to kind of explore and try to get out. And so these games are based on this novel, Roadside Picnic, and we can kind of see some of the if you've ever watched like videos of the game or whatever, you can kind of get a feel for what parts of this book are like based on that game, because there's a lot of it's not a very long book. The version I have, I think, is like 125 pages with pretty decent sized text. But it's there's a bunch of scenes, uh, quite a few, four, five, six, extended scenes of exploring this visitation zone is what they kind of call it. And those parts of the book are vivid, creative, intense, and that tension, that vividness, that creativity is what kind of spurred those Stalker games and kind of their aesthetic. But the book itself, actually, most of it takes place outside of the zone, near it, but outside of it. The main character of the book is a guy named Red Shoeheart, and there's not a whole lot of characters that have a big part in the book. There are a lot of bit parts, and there are a lot of people who basically became examples out in the zone. But the number of characters that we got is fairly small, and their casualty rate is kind of high as well. From a science fiction perspective, it's got quite a number of interesting ideas, from kind of like the obvious and mechanical, right? There's these things called empties, which are basically just two metal plates that are a certain distance away from each other, and you can't push them together or pull them apart. There's simple stuff like that, like basic, like, oh, this is a thing. And it's just here's a neat idea for a thing, and you don't really know what it was for or why it's there or why they stay the same way apart. But for a science fiction, idea as a mechanical one, that's a pretty good one. We have all kinds of traps that hang out in the zone, from like areas where gravity goes in a funny direction, to like massive like firestorms that come out of nowhere, lightning, all that kind of weird stuff. We have all these kind of mechanical ideas that are pretty interesting from a science fiction perspective. They're effective. They get the job done, right? And some of them are more obvious. The empties are about as obvious as it gets. They're just two metal plates, to pretty subtle, where you'll be walking somewhere in the zone and you'll just barely feel a little bit of wind on the side of your face, and you'll be like, oh, there must be one of these things over here. Let's steer clear of that kind of thing. Some of the stuff you don't even really get to see the effects of, although some of them you do get to see the very deleterious effects of. And it's not just mechanical ideas. I'm trying to say that there's a range here, because there's a bunch of really cool mechanical ideas, kind of the obvious stuff, and it ranges all the way down to actually pretty interesting philosophical ideas about what first contact, as it were, might be like, or what the visitation was, or what the zones are, or even things like what the zone does to people, or what the proximity to the zone does to people. For instance, was the visitation like a precursor to an invasion? Well, the argument is probably not, because there hasn't been any further contact, and there doesn't appear to be any like intelligent stuff in the zone. Was was it a crash or an accident? The answer seems to be no. There's regularity into how this happened. Um, you know, the explanation for the visitation that gets the most attention in the book is the one that corresponds to the title. That somehow some aliens decided to basically stop over, near Earth, and the things they left ended up creating these visitation zones. And what they left behind are basically things that are their garbage. But then there's even like the possibility that like this is like a test for humanity. But the answer seems to be more along the lines, and the prevailing theme appears to be that these things are mostly garbage. Some of them are a little bit useful. There's a thing called a so-so that appears to be like an unlimited battery, but not like not a super high power battery, right? Low wattage, but decent, but like infinite capacity at low wattage. People find ways to use some of the things that they find in the zone. The book has a very tragic arc. Red Shoeheart starts out as kind of like a lab assistant who is stalkering in his spare time. He goes into the zone at night when nobody knows where he is, and he tries to find things and bring them out and sell them to people. And of course, the government has made it illegal to go into the zone and illegal to sell things to people if you're not one of the government scientists. So, this is dangerous not only because of the traps and stuff that are in the zone, but also because of the people that will stand outside the zone, and if they see you, they will shoot you. Plus it's, you end up, Red ends up going to jail because he gets caught basically fencing something that he found in the zone. But but in the early part of the book, he's actually kind of like it's kind of like an open secret that he's a stalker, but he's also working at a lab as kind of like a lab assistant to kind of help guide the scientists in and out of the zone. But like it's the whole story has a very tragic arc in the sense that the overarching sense that you get is the things that you take out of the zone, the things that you get out of the zone are not worth what you put into the zone in general. There's occasional cases where someone goes in and they get some really good haul of things that they can fence to whoever. But generally speaking, going into the zone means that it's likely that you're going to die. And even if you don't die, you're going to get things that aren't worth that much money. And even if you get things that are worth some money, it's going to have lasting effects, not just on you, but on your children too. Those effects can be really subtle. Like one of the things that happens a lot in science fiction, of course, is that there's a proximal effect of something, right? Like a person is bathed in radiation and it does something to them. A person, is exposed to some kind of otherworldly intelligence and it does something to them, right? But one of the really subtle things about this book that I found interesting was that it talks about like these weird, I would almost call it like delayed or separated causality issues that happen. Here's an example that they give. They say that in and around areas of the zone, there have been people who've had experiences like this. Imagine that you are the son of a barber, the grandson of a barber, and you're a barber. Cool. You live near the zone. You don't even go into the zone. You just live near the zone. There's no radiation in the zone. There's no animals. There's no living things that have sentience. Everything, as far as we can tell, as far as the characters can tell, is all mindless, but like, just dangerous because of what it happens to be. But you, this barber who's never been in the zone, but only grew up near it, you go to another city and you start your barber, business. And for some reason, right, 90% of your customers end up getting hit by buses or falling downstairs and breaking their necks over the course of each year. And this is not kind of the proximal immediate effect that you see a lot in science fiction. This is something way more subtle and way more interesting because of its subtlety. Basically, could there be something like, an unluckiness effect of just being near the zone, right? Like, again, there's the what's Clark's thing. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, right? Well, imagine a sufficiently advanced technology that simply makes it so that you become a walking, black cat, a walking source of bad luck. It seems impossible. It seems improbable, but like at the same time, one of the things that gets played with in this book is that kind of subtle effect, and it's really, really interesting. The tone, of course, is pretty dark. I'd almost say nihilistic, because there's just so much danger and loss, and you don't know. No one knows why the zone has these mutagenic effects, but it even affects like your kids and stuff like that. And so everybody is kind of suffering, right? Especially as like the more wealthy people, the more well-to-do people try to get as far away from the zone as possible, which leaves the people who are there more and more impoverished, more and more reliant on kind of this grind of going in, risking your life, and maybe coming out with something that gives you just enough money to kind of live for another day. And then later on in the book, they say that they've canceled all emigration away from the zone area, and so now all these people are really trapped. They can't even go because people are worried that they're going to have that kind of faraway barber effect. That kind of bad luck effect on people or something like that. Or goodness knows what, right? Because if it can make a person unlucky, it could also make them, blow up or something like that. Who knows? It's, and of course, if the Roadside Picnic hypothesis is correct, then the things that the aliens left behind are basically their garbage. There's a couple of handy things that come out of it, but like for the most part, there's not really much of a practical use for any of this stuff, and therefore its value seems to only be because of its novelty, which is not necessarily a sustainable way for things to have value. What else can we say about this? The translation that I read seemed a little clumsy at times. I don't know. I can't read Russian, so I can't read the original version of the book. But like the English version that I read was a little clumsy and repetitive at times. There are multiple translations of this book. There's one that came out recently that has a foreword by what's her name? Ursula Guin, I think. Maybe that translation's a lot better. I might have to give it a look. But all in all, it was a pretty interesting read. It wasn't too long either. The characters are interesting. They're reasonably layered. I would say that they're not like the most complex or they don't have the most character growth that I've seen in like literature, but they get the job done as far as being there to show off the effects and the lasting effects and the external effects of being in or near the zone. It has a really ambiguous ending, which I found really interesting, because what the kind of the overarching theme, if you want to use that word, we've been getting is that what you get out of the zone isn't as good as you think it is, and maybe it's not worth and it's almost never worth what you put in, because all of these people are going in and they just get killed, ignominiously, and maybe they come out with a couple of little artifacts that someone can use. They find these sosos, is what they call them in the version that I read, that are these like batteries that you can run a car off of, for instance, but you're not going to make it into a bomb or whatever. And those are useful. It's just that humanity finds useful things to do with some of the things that are in the zone, but all in all, the feeling that you get is that this stuff isn't really worth it, And so we have this very ambiguous ending where Red is going in to get this last kind of El Dorado thing that's supposed to be in the zone. And, he and another character who's related to another character, which this is important and I don't want to spoil it, they make their way, they creep their way through the zone carefully. And they finally, follow this map, and they finally get to this thing, and, stuff happens to avoid spoiling the ending. And at the very end, the last thing you get is just like a line that sounds it sounds positive on its face, but because of the darkness, the lostness, the nihilism of the zone, it makes you wonder whether it's maybe a hallucination. Maybe there's some kind of like what do you call it? Where like the genie gives you what you want, but not kind of thing, like a monkey's paw effect or something. Whether this effect spreads out over a particular person, whether it goes to everybody near the zone, whether it does anything at all, whether it's the mad ramblings of a man just before he dies, you don't get to know. All these things are left unanswered, and so that's also a very interesting way to close the book and kind of leave it to your own imagination to but to wonder about what happened next. If anything, right? It could be, it could be the deranged ramblings of a man who has been driven mad by something in the zone. Who knows? Or maybe it is what they think it is, and everything's going to be okay. Probably not, based on the way that most of the book goes. But you never know, right? There is always the possibility that it was a test from the aliens, that they basically made a minefield around something really good. And they're like, well, if humanity can figure out how to get around this minefield and get to the good thing, then maybe they'll show their worth to the rest of the universe. Who knows? Anyway, I would say this is a really interesting little book. If you are interested in like Soviet literature, this is a really good book to check out. If you're interested in like really speculative science fiction, if you like the dark tone stuff, it's all really good. If you don't have a lot of time, it's not a very long book, so you can put this thing up and crunch through it in a night if you feel like it. It's got a very solid, what'd you call it? Consistent tone. It's got the really cool ending. It's got a lot of really neat science fiction ideas in it, and so if any of that stuff sounds good to you, you might want to check it out. And there are ways to get it to get a real hard copy of it with a different translator from the one that I read, and there are ways to go around and find free versions that have been translated by some random person. Who knows? I don't know. I've never heard of Antonina Bouis, so who knows? Anyway, I'll put some links in the description so that you can kind of figure out if you want to go check it out yourself. I would say it might be that the Stalker games are more fun than the book, because the book is kind of dreary, but at the same time, it's some solid science fiction, and it was interesting, and it made me think about like the different possibilities without giving me answers that kind of, because if something gives you too many answers, it can kind of cut off your imagination, right? So this one doesn't do that. It leaves things way open for you to be like, well, maybe it was this, or maybe this was this, or maybe this will happen, or maybe this will happen, or maybe this was this. Who knows? And that can be a fun jumping off point for your own thoughts and for your own kind of imagination as well. So yeah, positive review for sure. And definitely something to check out if you're interested in any of the kind of elements that I mentioned earlier. So that's all I've got for today. Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, I believe. Probably mispronouncing their names, especially the stress on which syllables, but that's just how it's going to be. Anyway, see y'all later and have a good day.